Good morning, world. Good morning, China. Good morning, Japan. Good morning, the community of Asia. Good morning, wherever you may be. My name is Yu Sanen. I am an international goodwill ambassador. I am special envoy and in charge of international relations for the Council for Justice, Equality and Peace at United Nations. I'm also the ambassador, international ambassador for Geography World, and Vice President Francophone for the Global Organization for Sustainable Development. I'm glad to be here at United Nations today to launch the 75th anniversary of United Nations. As we all know, after World War II, in 1945, 50 nations gathered here at United Nations to create United Nations to prevent war, to prevent discrimination, to prevent all bad things that's been happening for many years. But after 75 years, we are still asking, is this organization which is our mission? Because yet after 75 years, we still see discrimination. We still see child abuse, child trafficking, child being sent to war, even though they not turned 18 years yet. But today I was very glad to see more than 70 ambassadors with the Secretary General to launch the 75th anniversary of United Nations. There were more than 1,000 children, youth that gathered to discuss many different things to ensure by 2030 we'll have sustainable development. So I'm urging the whole world to get with United Nations, to get with all those international organizations that promote peace, that promote climate change, because we see now there's a lot of hurricane, there's a lot of things that's going on in California, in Mexico, many people dying in natural disaster, not mention war, and many people that are doing a terrorism attack. So I believe that we need to love our country. It is our world. It is our space. Our voice need to be heard. We need to cooperate. We need to put our input to ensure that the world is safe. We need to act like China's doing very well in terms of economic. Mexico is doing well too. The USA is doing well. Turkey is doing well. Many different states is doing well. That's why I'm asking the country that the developing country to ensure that you do the right thing. We are asking the country from Africa to ensure that you protect your state, to ensure that you protect your country, stop the corruption, stop the killing, promote your culture, promote your agriculture. So by 2030, we'll have sustainable development. So I am very glad that I'm sitting down with Mr. George Ring, that's doing a tremendous work in spreading the message in the Asian community, the Asian world. Mr. Wen has been around United Nations for many years, and he has interviewing many different head of state, NGOs, many different young people, to ensure that he put his input, he put his help to ensure that he's contributed to the sustainable development. So I'm glad to have been here with the General, with the Secretary General at United Nations to launch the 75th anniversary of United Nations. And I urge all of you to promote peace, to promote love, to promote reconciliation, stop the killing, stop interferences, and then let us get together to ensure we have a better world. My name is Yu Sanen, and that's my message to the whole world. Thank you very much.
And I want to also just welcome you. I think it's great that you're all here, especially those who came from afar. And I would like to say a special word of welcome to a particular group. Who's here from Eunice? Could you put your hands up? Okay, well, a very, very warm welcome to Eunice, our UN school. I'm actually, I have to confess, a father of a kid who was at Eunice, and I think they did an excellent job. And I'll tell you a secret, since we're just among a small group of friends here. One of the panelists spent her whole school career at Eunice. So when the panel comes on, I'll leave it to you to guess which one it was. Anyway, all the best. Thank you all for being here.
Are underway. Inequality is growing, and we face risks from long-running conflicts and new forms of violence. Solutions to these issues will require cooperation across borders, sectors, and generations. On the 75th anniversary of the United Nations in 2020, people from all walks of life are coming together to discuss global challenges and solutions.
What's Eric? My name is Michael Johnson.
Я Саша Макаричева, мне 10 лет.
I am Eric Spiekerman. I am now almost 73 years old.
我叫朱琳。
I am Samson Ogboli.
My name is Bob. I am 17 years old.
What are the big issues facing our world?
That's a big question.
Poverty that comes from inequity.
There's just a really huge divide right now in the world between the very rich and the very poor.
Forced migration and displacement is a common thread everywhere.
Et toi, qu'est-ce que tu penses que le monde actuel fait face?
Peut-être le changement climatique.
国家方面的话，就因为气候的变化导致很多的极端天气，然后带来了很多的一些自然灾害，导致了有些地方的人就是流离失所，造成了很严重的一些经济损失。
So how does climate change impact you?
Living on an island, we are very close to the ocean. So that's a huge population that's affected by the movements and the energies of the ocean.
For the local farmer, food production has become a major challenge because there is a need to ensure people get fed irrespective of what's happening.
We're getting an increasing number of large storms that are causing our floods levels to rise, making it cost prohibitive for people to live in our communities where they've lived for generations.
People are going to have to start making hard decisions about how to either protect the shoreline from rising water levels or relocate.
What steps can we take to solve climate change?
从减少生活上的能源消耗，还有就是减少排放。
I mean, we are facing a global problem, so I think the important task is to face that problem all together.
There's no way to resolve the crisis we have at hand without holding the biggest emitters accountable.
We need to understand the causes of climate change so that we can mitigate against it getting worse. On the flip side, there is a need to have adaptable technologies.
Tell me 3 things that technology has done for the world.
Technology has done a lot. We're more connected, we're more able to access information.
Technology has fed more people. I think it has cured disease.
Some of the negative impacts of technology that we see in the world is the rise of data and how easy it is to violate that.
Nobody has any privacy really anymore when you think about it.
Technology is not distributed equally. And then if not everyone has the same access, not everyone will be able to be eligible for jobs of the future.
If we talk about how technology has connected us, in the same way it has divided us.
但是实际上存在于互相沟通之间的这个语言暴力和一些甚至是一些暗藏的一些手段会变得更加多一点。
Домашнее насилие я испытала в детстве. У меня папа выпивающий был, и мама часто плакала. Ну вот это вот я помню, и у меня это осталось до сих пор в памяти.
Domestic violence it's a horrible thing, and there's different forms of domestic violence.
Y creo que eso es el gran cambio de paradigma. Es darse cuenta que no tiene que ver con una clase social, que no tiene que ver con una cuestión racial, que no tiene que ver con una cuestión religiosa, sino que absorbe todas las capas de la sociedad.
El 暴力在过去的很长一段时间里面，它一直到现在变得越来越容易实施，变得目的越来越多样，而且形式也越来越多样，而且变得越来越不可预测。
I mean, so many killings. And
That is kind of regular.
I was born and raised here, and then I saw everything about the insurgency and terrorism. I saw it from the humble beginning until now that it has blown beyond proportions.
Papa, ils sont quoi les différents types d'inégalités dans le monde?
L'inégalité, c'est un sujet assez intéressant. Hein. Ça peut être entre humains, entre sociétés et entre individus.
Everybody will want to seize the opportunity to get educated, but not everybody has access to that because of the cost of schooling or education.
There's no denying that there's an increase in homelessness in the city, yet even I find myself, what can we do? You know, like something is internally or externally wrong with what's going on worldwide that people are suffering, and there's this gap.
I think women still remain the most marginalized group of people within my community. And women still have to bend their backs to get things done and to get what they truly deserve.
I already faced racism in my daily life, where I was bullied because of my skin.
What can you really do? And does it really matter?
这个的话，就是我希望在人们在看到一些不公正的一些事情的时候，能够勇敢地站出来。
My grandmother in Chicago, she fed the homeless for 20 years. Finding a way to be part of any sort of small incremental solution creates so much change.
Я слышала, что некоторые люди уезжают из-за войны, потому что им начинается война в их стране, некуда деваться, и они переезжают.
Refugees are not statistics, they are people. They did not become refugees by choice. Who knows what tomorrow holds? As much as we pray against violence, there could be a natural disaster tomorrow, and I also become a refugee.
Ну, совсем землю-то бросим. С деревень все поехали в города.
Скотины не стало совсем в деревне. Растут только кладбища. Вот. Никто ничего не держит.
La cause, la raison même pour cet déplacement, c'est on parle de misère, on parle de manque d'opportunités, on parle de manque de structure, on parle de corruption.
Internal displacement is something that it's complicated because it can have so many different reasons why that happening. You have a very large portion of populations just running from violence and poverty, and they really don't have anywhere to go.
You don't have a place to sleep. I will tell you to come and sleep in my place. We should give shelter. We should give refugee. We should give food to them.
Хороший. Больше хорошего, наверное, чем плохого.
你希望在社群里看到为一个公正平等的社会做出怎样的努力？
I want to see real diversity of people in all industries.
I would love to see the planet being protected. I mean, we really don't have anywhere to go.
Я бы хотела, чтобы стали бороться с болезнями, которые нельзя вылечить, чтобы их можно было вылечить, чтобы появились новые технологии, которые будут помогать человеку.
Why is global cooperation important?
التعاون الدولي مهم إلنا كلنا ومهم كتير لتقدم الإنسان والإنسانية في مجال من الصحة للتعليم إلى القضاء على الفقر وخلق فرص عمل خاصة للشباب ومهم كتير كمان لتحقيق الأمن والسلام.
The world remains a global village. What affects one part of the world invariably affects every other part of the world.
And so it's talking to each other. We open the door for different understanding, but also the understanding that we all are pretty much in the same plight and looking for the same answers.
Countries from all over the world need to come together to essentially talk about the issues that really matter and be able to listen, empathize, as well as understand each other's problems.
How do we shape our future together?
Обсуждая.
By talking.
By listening.
与倾听. By listening.
My name is Natalie Summersinger. I'm part of the small team here that is helping to coordinate this initiative. And I think I'll take a moment here to welcome the Secretary General who's just joined us and our youth panelists. Please join me in welcoming them.
Good morning, everybody.
So, alas, as someone who is classified as an aging millennial, I'm told, my youth credentials weren't strong enough for me to join this panel, but I'm delighted to be able to introduce this event. And it's so wonderful to see so many young faces here. We have over a dozen universities, a ton of schools represented, so thank you so much for coming. We are hugely privileged to have the Secretary General of the United Nations, António Guterres, here with us. And we're also hugely privileged to have 6 inspiring youth leaders. Let me introduce them to you briefly. We have on the far side of the panel for me, Cristina Petcu from Romania, who has worked for a number of think tanks on conflict and global governance issues. We then have one of our own, Amit Joshi from Nepal, who is a member of the Young UN Network and who works for the Department of Economic and Social Affairs here. We have Natalia Herbst from Argentina, who worked with the National Youth Institute in that country on issues relating to social inclusion, health and rights, culture, and employability. Then on the other side of the Secretary General, we have Eleanor Pauwels from Belgium, who works in the field of new technologies and how we can manage their security and governance implications. We then have Isaiah Owolabi from Nigeria, who has set up excellent health and skills training initiatives to improve the lives of women and girls. And finally, here next to me, we have Jahan Rifai from Jordan, who is a graduate in strategic communications and has also spent time teaching English to refugees. Thank you all so much for coming. I must also acknowledge the Secretary General's envoy on youth, Jayatma Vikramanayake, who I'm absolutely thrilled is joining us on live from South Sudan, from Juba. I don't know whether we can actually show her. She's there, and with her are a group of about 25 youth leaders from Juba. They'll be watching this event, and we really hope we can go to them later for some comments so that they too can join in this discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, this year the United Nations turns 75, at a very critical moment for humanity. On the one hand, we can look back at several decades of progress. The world is, by many measures, health, literacy, education, a better place than it was in 1945, when the UN was created. in the aftermath of the Second World War and the Holocaust. On the other hand, we faced an ever-growing number of challenges: the climate emergency, environmental degradation, the threat of nuclear war. We need to manage the transition from the largest generation of young people to the largest generation of over 65. We need to find ways to address new forms of violence as well as long-running conflicts. We must get to grips with how technology is transforming the way in which we work, we live, we interact with each other. We need to tackle inequalities. We need to tackle the growing disconnect between people, governments, and institutions, and the backlash against the very principles that give power to people, such as human rights, women's empowerment, and social justice. And we need to do all of this at a time of geopolitical tensions, at a time when we're seeing a retreat from the institutions that were set up for states to work together to address global challenges, at a time when the founding spirit of the UN can seem sometimes forgotten. So against this backdrop, our Secretary General's vision for the 75th anniversary was not to throw a big, shiny birthday party, but rather to spark a conversation about how to rekindle that spirit and embark on a global listening tour to gather your opinions, your ideas, and your strategies on how we can work together to build the future we want, and how the UN can better meet the hopes and aspirations of the people we serve. And that's what this event is about today. It's the first UN75 event we're holding here at the UN in New York, but it's going to be the first of many. People across the world have already held UN75 dialogues. There will be many, many more throughout 2020. So before I hand over to the Secretary General, just a very few notes on today's proceedings. The Secretary General will have a conversation with our panelists for the next half an hour or so. We will then take some comments from the floor, from Juba, and also from social media. I really wish we had time to have a full debate and hear from everyone in this room, but I would like to manage your expectations now and say we have limited time, so we will only be able to take a few people. That's why we encouraged everyone attending to submit some comments through in advance and online, so we could ensure that we reflect the most common themes that were raised, as well as the diversity of participants. And after the comments, I will hand back to the Secretary General and the panelists for their responses and their final remarks. So, Secretary General, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I think that when one sees today's world, one can note that the peoples everywhere, we the peoples, is, as you know, the way the Charter begins, but the peoples everywhere are expressing their will to be heard, their voices to be taken into account, their anxieties, their fears, and their hopes to be expressed. And unfortunately, many times political leaders or leaders of international organizations like myself tend to talk too much and listen too little. So I want to have this 75th anniversary as an occasion for us to listen and to learn. So I'm not going to tell you what should be done. I'm going to ask you questions. And please don't ask me questions I won't answer. Give your comments, give your ideas, give your suggestions, give your critical comments on whatever you feel makes sense in relation to the issues we are going to discuss. And our panelists are supposed exactly not to ask me any question, but to give their own opinions. We are here as UN to listen and to learn, because we want to be better, and we want to better correspond to the hopes, to the expectations, but also to respond to the fears and anxieties of we the peoples that justify the UN. So I will start by a small survey. I mean, in 25 years we'll be 100 years old. Do you think the world will be better, worse, or the same? So I'm going to ask everybody to raise their hands. Those who think that the world will be better in 25 years, raise their hands, please. Worst. The same. I think there is a wave of optimism. It's interesting to note. And I would like our panelists to comment. Please, and feel at ease to interrupt each other. I mean, you are free to have an open discussion. We cannot talk too much because there are several areas, but your comment on this optimism that the room is showing, which sometimes doesn't correspond exactly to what we feel when we listen to the news.
Well, I did raise my hand for better off, but I do think this answer needs some nuance. As someone that works on creating a positive social impact, I have to believe that we will be better off. There is no way of engaging on this kind of work on a daily basis if you don't believe so. But I do think we currently are at a critical point, and that while we do have a trajectory, we need to be bolder in shaping the outcomes. The ongoing resistance from many power holders to adhere to very basic fact-based consensus, which are relevant to climate change and to reproductive rights, is becoming very challenging to fulfill the SDG agenda by 2030, which would be a very promising step towards a better 2045 direction. So I think we must remain optimistic because we do have a very clear roadmap of the actions we can start taking today to shape a 2045 that looks better than 2020, but we must all act collectively to demand for these stakeholders to adapt their practices to this agenda.
Do you agree?
I would say, if we use history as a guide, I would say a very big yes. And the reason I'm saying that is that even though there are many reasons why we might want to sound pessimistic, but in recent time we have seen increase in the number of girls that are enrolling in school. We have seen a decrease in the incidence of HIV and AIDS. We have seen how technology is transforming opportunities in education, health sector, and even creating more jobs in our world. But we aren't where we should be yet. So we can't rest on our horse and say the world will automatically progress because we have seen these antecedents. So but there are big decisions, big things that need to happen. We need to learn from the success that we have had and the challenges. But we also need one more thing to add to this, the character. Character is when decision makers at all levels of governance, private sector, civil society, and public organization decide to intentionally include women, girls, and young people to make sure that we achieve Agenda 2030 and even see a better world by 2045. Then
I see I have an ally here for gender parity. What's your comment from the extreme right?
Well, I said that it's going to be a worse world, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean that it has to be like this. What I'm trying to say is that I think that 2020 is, we should think of 2020 as if we are at crossroads, and we have two paths that we can choose from. And so one of them can be the optimistic path, the other one can be the pessimistic one. We see that we cannot take the progress that we've achieved so far for granted, and we see that people in the world are still fighting for their freedoms. We see democracy and surprisingly multilateralism is under fire. And then we also know that there's, in times of crisis, societies can break down or break through. So what I would like to suggest is for the United Nations 75th anniversary to be a moment for societies to break through in order for us to achieve that better 2045. And that can start with the adoption of the political declaration that member states will be negotiated in the coming months and will be adopting in September 2020. So I hope that's going to be ambitious enough.
Is the extreme left in agreement with the extreme right?
In disagreement. Hello? Yes. So I believe that the world will be better off for so many reasons that Isaiah has pointed out. Literacy rates are on the rise. More people are educated and have access to basic health care than they ever have before. Middle class globally is on the rise and continuing to grow. However, in my opinion, I think it will be better off, but I don't think better off necessarily means good. And I think that it's up to our generation, our youth, who have already shown that we're willing to take things into our own hands and create a future that we want for ourselves. I think it's up to us to make sure that it's not just better off, but that 2045 will actually be a good time.
And in Nepal, how do people see things?
I do think that
we will be a lot better. I'm positive in 2045. Based on our technological advancement that we've made in the last 2 decades, we've already seen our lives have improved a lot. Look at the communication. We've never thought the way we are communicating now is so easy and seamless, and access to information is a lot easier. And I do see the same positive trend in some of the areas, like global connectivity is getting cheaper, and a lot of people are getting connected. At the same time, due to advancement in the medical devices, diagnosis, there is increased lifespan. And also in transportation, we are already seeing these self-driving cars, and I hope to see these flying cars by 2045. And also, a lot of devices are becoming more smart and connected, trying to make our lives a lot easier. So I have a lot of hope that it will be a lot better.
Last but not least.
Yes, I would like to share a positive vision because, I've worked with youth and new technologies, and I think we could envision a world in 2045 where everyone has an opportunity to learn how to design and how to harness new technologies for common good. Those new technologies are essentially too powerful for humankind to refuse. It is artificial intelligence that can be used to anticipate and mediate conflicts, to prevent hate speech, to reduce human trafficking. It is AI and cybersecurity that can help protect us from election fraud, from cybercrime, from cyber attacks on our smart cities. But it is also AI and new DNA technologies that can help us prevent famine and epidemics, speed up precision medicine with new DNA tools in agriculture and in biotech. And so I think if humans can learn how to anticipate and how to shape futures, future lives could be empowered, they could be more inclusive and empowered on our fragile planet.
But do you see any risks in artificial intelligence? Or is it everything fine, as you said?
No. I see pervasive risks. There are enormous security implications, and that lies into the dual-use nature of AI. So I explain with a few examples. AI can be used for reducing human trafficking. It can also be used for pervasive surveillance. Developing society where you have a scoring system for citizens, where loans and insurance are only given to some of the most powerful, not those who struggle. So you can think also about how AI is almost like electricity, a force to amplify any other technology. AI plus DNA technologies mean that we can develop precision medicine. We can also develop more powerful biotech weapons. There is a potential for weaponization that's extremely powerful. So how do we train the next generation to anticipate, think, and translate norms into accountability mechanisms that will protect us? I think that's really the next challenge.
I think there is a general feeling. The feeling is there are reasons to be optimistic. We all bet in a better future. We need to be careful and to avoid some risks. And I would like to remind someone I admired enormously when I was a young politician, Jean Monnet, that used to say, well, I'm not optimistic, I'm not pessimistic, I'm determined. We need to be determined to have a better world in order for our optimism to be justified. But now I'd like to ask you, the six of you, one first question, and that is the following. Looking into the next 25 years, when the UN will be 100, what are the three things, and don't explain, just be quick, and what are the three things you really would like to see essentially changed in this horizon for a better world?
For me, first and foremost, I would like to see the return of the 71 million forcibly displaced people in the world. I'd like them to be safely home, hopefully before 2045, but that's my number one hope. I would also like to see the resolution of the conflicts of today, as well as the conflicts of yesterday that have continued on with no seeming end in sight. This includes, I'm from Jordan, so the Palestinian conflict, the Syrian conflict, and other conflicts not just within my own region. And lastly, this may be a little too optimistic or a little too cliche, but I would like to see a world, if I could see anything, a world with no fear, a world with no hatred, and a world where people can hope, but hope with reason, a world that gives people a reason to hope reasonably towards the future.
I think for me, it's like right to privacy especially with the use of this AI and like surveillance, and that gives rise to the freedom of speech, and at the same time, ethical use of new technologies and ban on lethal autonomous weapon systems.
Yes, I would say first I want to see a democratization of technologies, from AI to biotech to other of those transformative tools. Then I also would want to see technology serving humans and not the other way around. So I don't want us to become slaves to data sets, to algorithms, to the biases that can make those tools not only inefficient but actually harmful. And so as a third priority, I would want to see tech leaders and national leaders collaborate with civil society to really think about how to implement meaningful accountability. So how to design converging technologies, new technologies for the global south, and how to do it with enough inclusivity, diversity that we can anticipate and create accountability for all.
Thank you very much.
I think that what I'd like to see in 2045, it's that we don't need any more a 2030 agenda or a 2050 agenda, if that's going to happen, hopefully not. And then I'd like to see more people embracing or understanding the intrinsic value and also embracing multilateralism to the detriment of unilateralism. And lastly, probably what I'd like to see is more multi-stakeholder partnerships that can foster more innovation and that can help build or rebuild and transform our global governance system, including the United Nations.
For me, in 2045, I would like to see a world, first of all, that is actually defining what youth leadership should be, meaning young people should be in the driving seat. And what I typically mean by that is to see a world where young people less than 40 years are leading in over 70% of countries that we have in the world, and even in private sector organizations and civil society, and even having a UN Secretary General less than 40 years old. That would be the kind of world I would like to see.
Not be me.
The second big thing I would definitely like to see, it's a world that is equal, gender equality. I think this is something that the world can achieve. We are far from it if we look at recent reports showing that 22 of the richest people in the world is richer than all the women we have in Africa. So if we have an equal world in 2045, that would be a big one I want to see. And lastly, it might look too big to ask for, but a zero carbon world would be a good one, where the world recognizes that climate change is a big deal and we're tackling it big time.
Excellent.
So I guess my three things would be, first of all, I would like to see gender gaps in all of its forms, whether it's financial literacy, education, pay, access to health, closed, because not only because it's fair, but because women's rights are human rights. I would also like to see a world, we are currently living in a world in which 2/3 of the poor live in middle-income countries. So I would see a world that's working to reduce inequalities from a very multidimensional approach that goes beyond economic poverty and wealth creation to also work on social and environmental development so that people can reach their full potentials. And lastly, I would like to see governments gravitate back towards more human relations of dialogue and cooperation so that we can address global challenges collectively.
Any cross comments? Something that anyone said that the other would like to?
Well, I guess at the root of all of our comments is the fact that all of these problems are intertwined. Climate change is very much related to gender inequality. The same has to do with refugees crisis. So the key point is trying to address issues in an intersectional way, in multilateral way that can help us understand the world in its complexity.
I think you gave a pretty good picture of how do you want to see the world moving and what you want to get done. But I mean, there are obstacles, no? There are trends that do not move into that direction, and we have pushbacks in different... What are the obstacles, the pushbacks, the negative trends that more worry you?
For me, I would say one of the biggest trends that we should look into in the world is trends that borders around inequality, which can affect a lot of things in terms of trends in technological innovation. It's not serving women as it should, and it's not serving the poorest as it should. And if we also look at climate change, it's something that the world should be very, very concerned about, because it has the capacity to negatively impact generations across different sectors, and it has also the capacity to cause chaos beyond what we can imagine. So even when we are making the biggest of plans and we are deploying the biggest of technology tools, we should be very wary of the threat that is posed by climate change.
Your point of view?
I think that there are a couple of suspects here, and that's climate change, that's weapons of mass destruction, that's the collapse of our ecosystem, that's pandemics, antimicrobial resistance. In addition to that, we have a shifting of power dynamics, and we have a changing nature of conflict. We're seeing that more and more there's rising economies that want to be on the global governance space. So we need to avoid friction between the old powers and the new powers. Then we have some risk multipliers, right? We have inequality, and we have poor institutional capacity, conflict. So I think that what this tells us is that we cannot do business as usual anymore. That's not acceptable anymore. And the systems that we have in place, unfortunately, are too much process-oriented rather than result-oriented. And in order to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050, in order to have 1.5 degrees, in order to have a 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in the temperature, you need more result, and you need to do in a different way business.
You have been very technological. Are you going to stick to technology, or are you going to cover other challenges? And
actually, I will go for more cross-sectoral comment, but actually I really want to reinforce what you said. You mentioned a few negative implications, a few convergences that could lead to disasters. You said weapon of mass destruction. I think that one of the issues we need to think about is who is in the driving seat, right? And to some extent, it's not necessarily civil society and citizens, but often it's global CEOs with global reach, right? So how do we think about shifting the business model of converging technologies towards a model that serve indeed the global south, that served the imagination of other population, that includes different forms of knowledge and experiences? And I think that's one of the big obstacles. It's a lack of inclusion and a lack of diversity in designing and governing technologies. And then another lack is an incapacity to develop a vision. And I think the high-level panel, actually, that was promoted by the UN, helped us see a normative, positive vision for technological futures. How do we learn how to anticipate and shape what's coming, not for prediction, not for scaring populations, but to work towards prevention? For example, artificial intelligence and other technologies could be used for prevention instead of for negative implications or for the profit of a few. So how do we shift the business model?
I think to comment on that, I like that point, especially on the use of AI and the misuse of AI. It has both pros and cons. I mean, especially if you misuse it, then that means you're suppressing the voice of opponents. Like if there's a human rights activist, then because he or she can be tracked 24/7, then he or she cannot be protesting or like coming up with agendas to gather more masses. So, but at the same time, the same AI can be used for like better health, education access, and all those. Besides this, I think I would like to look at the bottom of why all of these issues are there. I think it boils down to shifting away from multilateralism. If we all agree on common agenda, common goal, these all issues can be tackled very easily. So I think organizations like UN should start promoting, or like as usual, they should focus more on promoting multilateralism and coming together to come up with one agenda that we don't want bad thing. We want to do for a common good. It's not just for one nation that you are being better than the other nation. So for all of people here, what I would like to say is think of one nation you like. It can be your own nation or any other nation. Think, that nation is now the whole world. What's next? Think about that. That should be our vision. We shouldn't be thinking about one nation competing with the other nation for the power dynamics. That's my thing.
Thank you very much.
One thing for sure that I think is hindering my vision for 2045 is geopolitical instability. I don't think that anyone could hope to progress, any person, country, region can hope to progress when it's plagued by conflict. And I think it becomes almost an ongoing cycle because those faced by conflict end up becoming more desperate from lack of education, lack of employment, and therefore become vulnerable to radicalization, from terrorist groups to basically feed on, and that just ends up becoming a cycle. And on that note, I think also one thing that I don't think has been touched upon yet is the age of misinformation that we're facing now and the way that it's affecting the polarization that we're seeing increasingly. Social media and media in general definitely has its upsides in bringing people together, but it definitely also has its dark sides that allows people to send false information, to incite outrage, and to, basically throw flame into the fire of polarization that we're seeing now. Yeah, I believe that's that.
Well, building on what Isaiah talked about, I think the approaches we choose to use and we prioritize when working to reduce inequalities will be key to how sustainable our future is. And in that regard, there are two most relevant issues. On the one hand, I think it will be essential for power holders to build diverse teams, and I'm thinking about gender diversity, both binary and non-binary gender identities, ethnic diversities, national diversity, professional training diversity, so that the policy designs that we can reach to tackle these problems are complex and can have the less bias possible. And in that way, we can really honor the underlying SDG principle of leaving no one behind. And very connected to this, and it has been mentioned before in the conversation today, I think in this context of rise of digital technologies, it will be fundamental that we exploit it for its equalizer potential, but that we are always very, very mindful of the exclusion risks it entails, and that in these diverse groups can work to reduce that risk.
Well, I think that, first of all, there is a wave of optimism. Second, there are very ambitious visions about what the world should be, and the recognition of some obstacles, but the obstacles were always seen as how to overcome them. I mean, your testimony was to say, oh, we have these obstacles, we are doomed. No, I mean, there are these problems, but we can solve them. And I was very happy to see your approach. The question is, I mean, as you know, multilateralism is under attack in today's world. What is the role you see for international cooperation to reach those objectives and overcome those obstacles? And how do you see the UN playing its role? Which means, is it a role? Is there a role for the UN in this context? And if yes, what should the UN do to do better in relation to what we are doing now? Feel at ease, though. If you want to be very critical, you can be. It's exactly why you are here.
Well, I think there is actually a unique role for the UN here. And a first, aspect of that role is really a convening power. You are one of the only institutions, I think, that can bring in the room tech leaders and national leaders to really, help shift that business model and make us work towards meaningful accountability. So you have, capacity to bridge the interest of different nations, the tech leaders, the tech takers. There is another aspect of that leadership that you have, which is, encouraging nations and the private sector to use a little bit more of what I call foresight. So tech and normative foresight. Try to understand in anticipation how to prepare our normative frameworks, our societies for the technologies and the societal challenges of tomorrow. And then there is something I think that you have that maybe no other institution has, is a deep knowledge of how technologies are being used and misused in context of fragility and conflict, where vulnerable populations are on the line. And I think you can actually harness that knowledge to push us toward a high-level benchmark for norms. You have, the inside knowledge, the courage, the teams that are doing field research on the ground that can help us understand what does it mean to make norms that are future-proof, but that are also designed for the most vulnerable communities.
I can go. I think that, in terms of your question, is international cooperation, why is it important? I think that knowing these global challenges that we just spoke about, we kind of all are aware of the fact that no one state alone can take unilateral action to tackle all of these transnational challenges. And therefore, we need institutions such as the UN, and we need global cooperation to tackle these global challenges. Now, in terms of how the UN can do it better, I think that there's the gap is not in the dearth of good ideas that are out there, neither in the risk, in the awareness that there's there's so many risks that surround us, but it's actually in the reality that implementing change is difficult, and especially at times of unilateralism and raising nationalism. And we have to be aware also of the fact that now, during the 75th anniversary of the UN, that change will be hard to happen. And luckily, I don't know if there are member states here, but I would truly encourage them to be as ambitious as they can in their negotiations for the outcome document. And I think that there's also government-led coalition building initiatives, such as the Alliance for Multilateralism, but also civil society initiatives, such as the UN2020 initiative, such as the Together First campaign, the Youth Peace and Security Coalition, that can move the political dial and that can push the political leaders to be more ambitious and to try to have some innovative reform proposals in the political declaration that will be adopted this year.
I think the UN has a big role to play, and I think the global cooperation has a big role to play. But as my colleagues here have said, there's no one institution that can do it all alone. It's it's through a unique kind of collaboration that is also inclusive. So I think the starting point based on my suggestion would be to leverage on the 75 years of knowledge that the UN already has and explore opportunities to see how we can bring the big partners, I mean the private sector, civil society, government organization, to the same table in a conducive platform to be able to leverage on this knowledge to create a society that is inclusive and equal for persons living with disability, the poorest women and girls across the world, and making sure that leadership truly means genuine leadership, putting them on the driving seat. The other thing is to explore the opportunities at country level and even at UN level to reduce the bureaucracies involved before taking action so that we can have better opportunities to leverage on the data that we have acquired over the last 75 years to inform decision that would help the next 75 years to be better in multiple fold. Lastly, I think that one of the biggest way that the UN could play a big role in achieving this, or what the UN could do better, is to make sure that these biggest lessons are sustained in a way that there's been many solutions over time that their impact has been terminated at some point. We are not able to sustain them because we are not integrating across sector. So we need to find platforms that integrate knowledge from technology sector to even traditional platforms and local platforms, and see how we can make sure this is creating solutions from the lowest level to the highest level of governance.
Well, my comment builds on what Isaiah was just proposing towards the end. I obviously think international cooperation is central to address the kind of complex challenges we've been discussing all morning, from food insecurity to climate change to refugee crisis and rights. And I think I would like to highlight the potential of South-South and triangular cooperation. I think these types of partnerships have a tremendous potential to leverage all this expertise generated in the global south and match it with resources from the global north that so many times are missing from South-South partnerships. And I think there's a huge role for the UN in this regard to support partners adopting a AAA approach that looks at affordability, appropriateness, and adaptability of projects so that the receiving partners can embrace these development processes in a sustainable way.
I would like to echo what everyone here has said. Obviously, we all understand the importance of global cooperation and that no one nation can overcome these challenges and that no one nation faces these challenges alone. What I would think that the UN could play a role in is including those who are anti-multilateralism. The way I see it, I don't think there's anyone in this world that does not want a better life for themselves and for their children. And those that are anti-multilateralism are so because they believe that they will be better off without it. So what I think the UN could do is not only to educate and engage those who are anti-global cooperation, but also to, some of them are left behind by global cooperation, by supply chains moving, by new technologies. So to ensure that they're included and that the policies that this world puts forth don't just have value for those who are privileged, for those who are multinational corporations, but also, those on the ground, as many people have said.
A very important observation. Very important observation.
I think I do agree on most of what the panel members have said. Just to echo on, we do have to support multilateralism. That's more or less given, but how is the question. I think we also need to look at why it's not there and why people are going more on one nation competing with the another one. I think there are a lot of news, maybe fake news, maybe propaganda news. So we have to look at how the technologies are being used to create this environment of faking, stirring violence or stirring negative fear on people so that they support nationalism. So I think UN can play a role there by doing outreach, sufficient outreach, conducting more dialogues like these with youths, and also at the same time, not just bringing youth at the consultation level, but also at the decision table. That would be my point. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I have to say that I'm deeply impressed by this discussion. You said that you want a Secretary General younger than 40, and I think it might be a very good idea. But I mean, what you have demonstrated here is that you are very well prepared. You are very knowledgeable about the issues. You have prepared very well for this debate. You even have lots of notes, but you didn't read the notes. And what we have sometimes in many of the discussions is that people start reading papers and they really do not discuss. You were very well prepared, but you had not to read your notes. You had really to say what you feel. And this is the kind of dynamic discussion that we want in the UN75. So your contribution has been fantastic, but we need other voices. So I give you the floor to conduct the operations.
Thank you, and I will read from my notes because I want to make sure I don't leave anyone out. And thank you. I really didn't want to interrupt the discussion, but we really do want to take some comments from the floor. In a minute, I'm going to go to Giovanna from Brazil, and then to Kwame from Kenya. After that, I'm keeping my fingers crossed, we'll be able to go to Jatma in Juba. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted comments. I'm really sorry we can't have you all speak today. The first two comments that we're taking from the floor do, however, reflect the two most popular and common issues that were raised, climate change and youth. So Giovanna, please go ahead.
So I went to COP25 last year, and I came back very disappointed with our world leaders. You know, in Latin America, the effects of climate change are increasingly felt, and they also affect security. However, we must recognize that insecurity also contributes towards climate change. Take the deforestation in the Amazon. 90% of it has been caused by illegal activities, which shows that we urgently need better climate governance at the UN, considering the linkage between climate and security. Moreover, it's not just about international security, it's also about human rights, development, and so on. The climate crisis should be front and center of every UN75 dialogue and UN activity. The UN should mainstream it, otherwise there is a real risk there will be no future left for the UN we need. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kwame?
Thank you. So I'm Kwame from Kenya, and I work in the youth space. And we've seen studies have shown that the global inequality prevents over a third of the youth population from reaching their potential. And we all are aware that youth are a population that we can simply not do without. So my question is, what are the systemic changes that the panel can advise governments to take, or the UN to take, so that they can promote youth mobility and make sure that the youth enter into the workforce and contributes to the world economy? Thank you.
Thank you both. I think we're now okay to go to Juba, I hope. Yay.
Hello.
Great to see you, Jack.
Hi.
I'm going to hand over to you.
Go ahead. All right. Hello, SG, and hello, everyone in New York. From Juba, South Sudan. I'm here at the UN premises surrounded by a group of young people, but also our resident coordinator, Alan Nadehu. In case you are wondering why I'm in South Sudan, it is because of a very special reason. South Sudan is the youngest country in the world with over 72% of its population under the age of 30. So without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to two young people from here to share their comments and their perspectives to the questions that the Secretary General has raised. First, we have Paulino Lukudu, and then we will come to Ria Yuyuda. Paulino.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Paulino Lukudu. I'm a politician and a member of the National Dialogue Steering Committee. It's my pleasure to welcome you in Juba and be connected with people in New York. And as a youth, we believe that youth is the largest population in the universe and in South Sudan. As he has said, youths in South Sudan constitute 72% of the population, which means if you want to look for the solution to the issues faced by youth, you have to involve youth, because the world that we want lives within us. It is only that the bottom to choose between the right and wrong lives within other people's hands. But we believe that the youth all over the universe are facing some challenges, and the challenges that will be addressed together when there is intergenerational dialogue, when there is understanding of the youth issues and the youth challenges. I will start with the issues to do with the governance. The issues to do with the governance, and this visit comes in the right time, whereby the Secretary General is expected to report to the United Nations Security Council on the resolution of the 2050, in which it is a resolution that empowers youth in almost 5 areas: participation, and some of the participation, engagement, and prevention, protection, and disengagement and reintegration. So by involving youth in governance issues, youth should not be in the backseat of the decision making in many of the aspects in life. We believe that youth should be in the driving seat. And issues to do with security is also very paramount, that most of the youths are fleeing their origin countries because of security threats. Some of them are human man-made disasters. Some of them are actually climate change and natural disasters. But world peace matters a lot, because we believe that when there is a security, stable security, youth will contribute into the world economy, youth will contribute into the national development, and youth will contribute to the UN resolution of Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you very much, Paulino. Ria?
All right, thank you so much. My name is Ria William Yuyada, and I'm happy to be here in Juba joining the conversation. The UN Secretary General, you mentioned that we should not ask questions, so I'll go straight to my comments, and if time allows, I'll ask my questions to you later. You asked us a question of, will the world be better? And looking at these youth seated in this room, I believe that the world, including South Sudan, will be in a better place only if the intentionally excluded majority, who are mainly the youth, the young women, are included in all decision-making processes. South Sudan is the youngest country in the world, as our youth envoy here mentioned. We continue in armed conflict, poor institutions, institutions of governance, economic and humanitarian crisis, from accessing development gains and realizing our potential. Girls in particular face serious barriers to achieving their potential, increasing rates of violence, forced child marriages, unintended pregnancies, and intentional excluding of youth and the women. Youth are among the most who are radicalized in this country, so their participation in all key decision-making decisions is very vital for us. So it's against this backdrop in South Sudan that I'll ask the questions that you don't want to be asked. What can the UN and the youth collectively do to prevent escalation and eruption of new forms of violence, especially in fragile countries like South Sudan? How does the UN ensure that peace processes are implemented beyond processes but the agreements? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ria. Thank you very much, SG, and over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to take in, if I may, a few comments from social media because we have had so many. So I'm not being rude and messaging people. I'm actually scrolling through the feed. So we have Stevie in Nigeria who says, what are the sort of global plans to deploy solutions, blockchain solutions to tackle global challenges? Governments can be very dishonest. There are solutions that have been developed, but we need some backing to put them into practice. Ben from the UK says, surely we can all agree that algorithms shouldn't decide who gets killed. We should ban lethal autonomous weapons now, ban killer robots. Purna in India is wondering, how can we ever hope to regulate technologies like social media when governments are only in the margins and companies are in the driving seats? We then had a lot of comments about specific crises, highlighting the plights of refugees. I'll just pick one. Katrine in Fiji says climate change will cause millions more people around the world to lose their homes. We aren't even close to addressing this situation. We need plans, lasting solutions. We need legal protections and guarantees. So that's just a flavor of what's been coming through. I will hand back to you with that.
Well, thank you very much. And I have a last question to ask our panelists. I mean, if you would have one advice to give me in relation to all these things that we have discussed, what would be that advice?
I think, first of all, I want to start this by saying I think that you've made strides in having the voice of youth be heard around the United Nations, and the world has followed suit. You know, youth are coming into boardrooms to consult and all over. One thing that I would ask you to prioritize is perhaps creating an empowered space for youth to be the decision makers themselves. Thank you.
Let's go around.
Okay. One thing I would advise is to focus resources, efforts, interventions on ending inequality in our generation.
I would say a new form of normative leadership for converging technologies. So we heard about lethal autonomous weapons, a lot of different negative implications of technologies. I think you have the power to create this normative leadership and a higher level benchmark, because you also have knowledge about how tech can be misused with vulnerable communities. And just to kind of answer some of the questions, can I do that? From the tech perspective, I think one hope is this interaction between youth and democratization of technologies. AI is a knowledge revolution more than a tech revolution. You can own the tools of learning how to do AI yourself. You can learn the tools, even to play with DNA technologies. I've seen young people do it in public labs, in citizen labs. If you do that effort of owning that knowledge, you can be a revolution in terms of how policymaking can be better informed informed to the challenges we are facing. So I think there is really something about democratization, knowledge, ownership, and looking towards the future with foresight.
I think my comment builds on Jahan's, and it has to do with youth. I think governance actors, including the UN, have still more space to innovate in how they embrace youth leadership, having them in their formal structures and not just in consultation spaces. I think there's a lot of work we can do in innovating in the language we use to engage with them, in the approaches and the spaces, so that they feel valued and they feel their agency elevated, so that they can raise their concerns, but also propose solutions to address the issues that they care more about.
Yeah, for me, I really like what Jana said, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for having your time spent discussing these topics on engaging youth and doing more. I hope you will do more of this in the days to come. And especially on what I would like you to do is like the use of AI, most likely in the negative way. So how do we prevent it happening? For example, right to privacy, I'm very much concerned about it because the data can be collected by both the corporations as well as the governments. Corporations try to collect data for making profits. In the name of making profits, they will collect without getting explicit consent from you. And at the same time, governments start collecting and monitoring and tracking you 24/7 to suppress your voice. So where are we now heading to? So there's no freedom of speech. So I think like if you can come up with some recommendations on ethical, legal, moral framework for AI development, that I would really appreciate it.
And I like to go back to the theme of the United Nations 75th anniversary. I think that's what I've been doing all the time. But then an ask for this year. Make the United Nations 75th anniversary more than a birthday celebration. More than just a birthday celebration. And basically allow or encourage a platform for the 3 UNs to come together, and 3 UNs meaning member states, international civil servants, and civil society, which sort of has been excluded so far from this process, to come together and negotiate that political declaration that it's so important for this year. And then also, I would also encourage you to treat the United Nations 75th anniversary as a landing pad for a few timely, innovative reforms for global governance, but more as a launch pad for more ambitious reforms that might take more time to mature and to garner political support.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not going to extract precipitate conclusions from the debate. Everything that was said was registered, and we are going to have thousands of meetings like these all around the world. We have asked our resident coordinators, we have asked governments and parliaments, we have asked civil society organizations of all sorts, we're going to ask trade unions, we are going to ask entrepreneur organizations. We had already the experience in Davos of this kind of experience. For us, it's extremely important to allow the maximum number of people to be able to talk to us, but not for us to sell a product, but to be able to help us shape what we need to do in the future in order to respond to the questions that were raised in this discussion. And I think it's important to note, first, there is an essential trend of optimism. We believe that the future can be better. And this is very important. We are not desperate thinking that we are going to sink. No, we want to move up. We are aware of a number of dangers and obstacles, but I think that there was a very clear message here. I mean, young generations need to not only be able to have their voices heard, but need to be part of the system that manages the world, and need to be part of it at government level, need to be part of it at companies level, need to be part of it at international organization level like the UN. And I think that there was a very strong message that there is a role for international cooperation, a role for the UN, but we need to be able to be also sustainability and inclusivity were discussed by all. The need of equality, of diversity. We also in the UN need to be sustainable, need to be inclusive, need to allow not only the governments that are part of the organization, but the civil society, the business community, and especially young people to be strongly engaged in our activities. And at the same time, a very solid message that also came about gender equality that I consider extremely important. But when one looks at your vision of the world, it is clear that you have already understood the enormous potential and the enormous challenge that technology will bring to the world. Things will be very different. The way we work will be very different. The way we relate to each other will be very different. The way we handle problems will be very different. And there is no way my generation can do it. I think your generation needs to be able to do it. I'm very happy that you could have come today. And the model of this discussion corresponds exactly to what we want in hopefully thousands of discussions around the world. Please convey to you the messages that we consider essential for us to be able to change. We want to change, we want to be better, we want to respond to your aspirations, to your concerns. We want you to have the opportunity to play the role the youth must play in the modern world in which we live, and especially in the world we are trying to build. So thank you very much to all of you. It's a pity not everybody could talk, but I think we had an excellent contribution from our panelists and an excellent contribution from all the others that had an opportunity to contribute to this debate. Thank you very much, and be sure that everything that you said will be seriously taken into account. Thank you very much. You have still something to say?
No. How could I say it better than you? Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much. I think now we have to put these things here. Bye. Bye, thank you very much.
Excuse me, sir. Thank you. Excuse me. Excuse me, come into the room. Excuse me, ladies. Excuse me, come into the room. Sorry, ladies. Excuse me, madame. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me.